It is the most fragile, dangerous, and heavily contested 38 kilometers of saltwater on the planet. This is the Strait of Hormuz. Located precisely at 26 degrees north, 56 degrees east, this narrow oceanic bottleneck forms the only exit from the Persian Gulf into the open ocean. To look at it from above is to witness a terrifying vulnerability in the architecture of the modern world. Every single day, 21 million barrels of crude oil are forced through this impossibly tight geological fracture. That is 20% of the world's petroleum packed into a shipping lane just 2 kilometers wide in each direction. The scale of human engineering moving through this water is incomprehensible. At any given moment, dozens of very large crude carriers, ships exceeding 300 meters in length, each carrying enough explosive energy to power a small country for a year, are stacked nose to tail in water that averages just 88 meters deep. But what makes this place truly terrifying is not just the volume of oil, but the physical environment these leviathans must navigate. The strait is not a calm lake, it is a violent hydrodynamic funnel. As the tides shift, massive volumes of water are pushed through the mountainous bottleneck of the Musandam Peninsula, generating complex tidal shears and currents exceeding 2.5 knots. The sheer draft of these supertankers, reaching 22 meters below the surface, leaves almost no room for error. Their massive bronze propellers violently dredge the anoxic, toxic sludge of the seafloor, creating a permanent dead zone where almost no biological life can survive the constant mechanical churning and acoustic violence. The noise down here is deafening, a perpetual bone-rattling thrum of massive diesel engines that completely blinds marine mammals and fractures the ocean ecosystem. Adding to the extreme geographic and navigational hazards is the inescapable geopolitical reality. You are looking at a permanent floating standoff. The jagged coastlines belong to Iran to the north and Oman to the south. The shipping lanes purposefully hug the deepest contours of the trench, forcing these slow, lumbering megastructures into a painfully predictable narrow corridor, entirely exposed to the heavily armed, fast attack craft that dart endlessly between their massive steel hulls like wasps. The air above the water is thick with diesel exhaust, burning gas flares, and the static of military radar. The Strait of Hormuz should not work. It is too narrow, too shallow, and too volatile to serve as the primary artery of global civilization. One single mistake, one failed rudder, one unpredicted storm surge, one deliberate act of obstruction could sink a vessel here, instantly blocking the channel and triggering an immediate collapse of the global energy grid. As we plunge deeper beneath the hulls of these ships into the scarred metallic graveyard of the seafloor below, we have to ask the ultimate question: how long can an ecosystem and a global economy survive on a razor's edge this sharp?
Beneath the surface, the Strait of Hormuz is not just a body of water, it is an active, violent geological war zone. Look at the seafloor. This is the exact boundary where the massive Arabian tectonic plate violently smashes into the Eurasian plate. The Earth is quite literally buckling under the pressure, pushing jagged limestone upward to create this terrifyingly shallow bottleneck. Scientific ROVs mapping this dark abyss reveal a microscopic margin of error. Massive supertankers are forced to navigate through incredibly tight, winding underwater canyons, their hulls scraping dangerously close to the rock. But the geology is only the first hazard. At 40 meters deep, an invisible, violent chemical collision occurs. This is the halocline. The ultra-salty water of the Persian Gulf violently slams into the cooler Indian Ocean, creating massive underwater turbulence that can literally drag ships off course. When scientists deploy water sampling rosettes into this chaotic current, the data is horrifying. The oxygen levels plummet. Hyperspectral imaging reveals the invisible truth, a glowing highway of toxic chemical runoff and heavy hydrocarbons blanketing the entire 38-kilometer strait. If you core deep into the seabed, the timeline of our addiction is written in the mud. Pristine white ancient coral is completely buried under a thick, black layer of toxic industrial sludge. If you are finding this scientific breakdown fascinating, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Down here, the noise pollution is absolute. Hydrophones capture a deafening wall of mechanical violence that completely erases natural marine communication. Switch to thermal imaging, and you see colossal tornadoes of superheated diesel exhaust tearing through the atmosphere, permanently altering the local microclimate. The science gets even darker. Deep tectonic fissures actively vent highly toxic hydrogen sulfide gas directly into the shipping lanes. Above, a relentless, apocalyptic blizzard of anthropogenic marine snow, coagulated diesel carbon and microplastics rains down constantly. The sheer mass of the supertankers is so immense that their passage literally reverses the flow of the ocean at the bottom. Decades of unregulated dumping have terraformed the seafloor, creating towering mountains of pure petrochemical waste where mutated extremophile bacteria thrive in the pitch black. To prove how completely unstable this water is, scientists release neon green fluorescent tracer dye. According to traditional models, it should drift slowly. Instead, it is violently sucked into a massive underwater tornado, dragged directly into the crushing cavitation field of a bronze propeller, and instantly vaporized. This visually proves one terrifying fact. If a massive oil spill happens here, containment is an absolute scientific impossibility. The poison would spread across the entire global artery in minutes. What do you think is the biggest threat here? Let me know in the comments. But the ultimate, most terrifying anomaly lies buried in the dark sediment, a highly unstable, unexploded naval mine from the tanker war. The extreme artificial currents created by modern tankers have scoured away the mud, fully exposing its rusted detonator horns. The true nightmare? The deafening acoustic vibration from the massive supertankers passing mere meters above is actively shaking the explosive. The mechanical noise alone could trigger a catastrophic detonation. As we breach the oily surface into the dead of night, the unstoppable industrial machine simply continues to grind forward, completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb directly beneath it. The true magnitude. Look down from 2,000 meters. From this terrifying altitude, the entire 38-kilometer width of the Strait of Hormuz is laid bare. Trapped within this narrow geological vise of arid limestone mountains, over 30 colossal supertankers crawl like tiny insects through the deep-water corridors. The scale of our global energy addiction is almost incomprehensible until you dive closer. Plunge toward the surface, and a traditional wooden fishing boat is instantly dwarfed, swallowed by the cold, menacing shadow of a 300-meter wall of steel. Human beings are no longer the apex entities here. The machines have entirely taken over the ocean. Fly across a cargo deck the size of 3 football fields. Beneath this incredibly complex labyrinth of pressurized piping rests 2 million barrels of crude oil. Drop to the waterline and watch 300,000 tons of steel brutalize the ocean. The water isn't just pushed, it is catastrophically crushed into blinding white foam. Descend 20 meters down the rusted, vertical cliff face of the ship's draft into the dark abyss. Down here, the scale of human infrastructure violently intrudes. A massive 20-ton steel anchor plummets from the surface, violently shattering the limestone seabed and vaporizing the rock into a toxic cloud. As the dust clears, a 2-kilometer-wide trench is revealed, bulldozed entirely by decades of scraping hulls. The sheer volume of these vessels actually reverses the ocean's flow, violently sucking massive ghost nets backward against the natural tide. The 10-meter bronze propellers carve tornadoes of boiling cavitation bubbles, leaving violent, miles-long white scars across the surface. If you're amazed by the terrifying scale of this machinery, please take a second to subscribe and like this video. Let's go deeper. Below the ships, massive 48-inch steel pipelines pulse with high-pressure crude, while sprawling offshore processing facilities vomit blinding orange fireballs into the smog-choked sky. Suddenly, the geopolitical scale violently intrudes. A massive nuclear-powered aircraft carrier strike group squeezes into the impossibly tight corridor, surrounded by swarming fast attack boats. And perfectly silent, 50 meters below the chaotic surface, a nuclear attack submarine glides like a ghost beneath the clumsy red bellies of the commercial tankers. As the blood-red sun sets, billions of dollars of raw capital float on the dark, oily water. A single fragile jellyfish is effortlessly obliterated by the terrifying suction of the mechanical giants. By night, the strait transforms into a sprawling, floating industrial city, glowing with blinding halogen lights. The deafening acoustic roar of the fleet acts as a physical weapon, violently shaking the water column and liquefying the sand on the seabed. Switch to thermal imaging, and a terrifying river of blinding white heat exposes the colossal thermal pollution dumped into the fragile microclimate. The intense low-frequency vibrations from the fleet are so massive, they actually trigger microtremors along the tectonic fault lines far below. Pull back to the edge of the atmosphere and watch this glowing line of ships fan out into the vast Arabian Sea, pumping lifeblood to the entire planet. But at the bottom of the strait, nothing remains but crushed, toxic, completely lifeless black mud. And as a new dawn breaks, the terrifying cycle simply begins again, an endless 24-hour machine that never sleeps.
Ships, life, and the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is a graveyard. 88 meters down, the violently torn steel hull of a sunken 1980s tanker serves as a permanent, terrifying monument to the extreme volatility of this corridor. The rusted metal, eaten alive by toxic extremophile bacteria, physically crumbles into the fierce bottom current. Move across the dead seafloor, and a fractured pipeline violently blasts a jet of thick black crude oil into the water. As this toxic plume rises, it hits an anoxic boundary layer where thousands of silver fish float, chemically suffocated by the complete lack of oxygen. Breach the surface and watch the brutal kinetic force of a passing supertanker effortlessly snap heavy steel cables, vaulting a wall of black oil completely over a desperate containment boom. What do you think is the most dangerous part of this strait? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. The geopolitical friction is razor thin. Heavily armed military attack boats aggressively swarm the massive tankers. Captured in ultra-slow motion, the terrifying hydrodynamic suction of the massive hull threatens to pull the tiny fiberglass boats into the churning wake. Beneath the surface, the 5-story steel rudder of the tanker visibly bends and violently groans under the impossible pressure of an emergency turn. Above water, the jagged coastlines bristle with active anti-ship missile batteries and radar domes. There is absolutely no safe distance. Suddenly, an apocalyptic sandstorm blows off the Arabian desert. Millions of tons of abrasive red sand strip the paint from the ships, reducing visibility to absolute zero. The sand physically binds with the surface oil, creating a heavy, toxic sludge that rains down into the darkness. Blinded by the storm, 2 supertankers cross paths in the pitch-black water, missing each other by mere inches. In the panic, a dropped anchor completely shatters a vital underwater pipeline. As the storm whips the ocean into a frenzy, 300,000 tons of steel violently slam into the massive swells, creating blinding shock waves of crushed cavitation bubbles. A violent lightning bolt strikes an exhaust stack, igniting a terrifying, localized fireball above the explosive cargo. At dawn, a tanker pumps thousands of tons of foreign ballast water into the strait, violently introducing invasive species. Down on the scarred seabed, a vital fiber-optic submarine cable carrying trillions in global financial data lies terrifyingly exposed just inches from an anchor trench. A brief downpour scrubs the heavy atmospheric smog, pelting the ocean with highly toxic black acid rain. Small smuggling speedboats loaded with explosive barrels violently weave through the massive commercial fleet. We zoom in on a microscopic stress fracture in a tanker's hull, violently ejecting a needle-thin stream of pressurized crude. Brutal mechanical dredgers completely pulverize the ancient limestone bedrock to artificially widen the channel. A massive mooring buoy violently groans under the immense tension of a loading tanker. Chemical dispersants are sprayed, shattering the oil into a sinking cloud that suffocates the mid-water ecosystem. But the true horror is the permanent, miles-long slick of operational leakage that is entirely ignored. An underwater seismic air gun blasts the seabed, permanently destroying the hearing of any marine mammals. Suddenly, massive electronic warfare jamming entirely blinds the ship's radar. The highly organized transit lane instantly collapses into a terrifying gridlock. Dozens of explosive vessels drift blindly, their massive propellers carving violent underwater tornadoes. As a blood-red dawn breaks, the global energy artery is completely paralyzed and exposed.
What science cannot explain. Drop straight down from the chaotic surface into the absolute darkness of the 88-meter seafloor. We transition instantly from geopolitical tension to pure, terrifying scientific mystery. An advanced ROV hovers over a newly discovered tectonic fissure. This completely defies established geological models. Instead of cold methane, a violent jet of superheated fluid blasts into the freezing water, surrounded by a sprawling mat of undocumented bioluminescent purple bacteria. Push in close. The fluid is so fiercely hot that the titanium temperature probe physically scorches, boiling the water around it. This localized thermal anomaly should not exist here, but the mysteries multiply. Look at the ROV's magnetic compass. The needle is violently spinning in complete erratic madness. The dark water is thick with a strange, glittering black ferromagnetic dust. Bizarrely, this heavy metallic dust does not sink. It actively swirls upward in a massive, perfect double helix vortex, completely defying gravity and fluid dynamics. What massive, hidden magnetic force is pulling it toward the steel hulls above? Ascend slightly to 45 meters, and the anomaly becomes acoustic. A highly sensitive hydrophone hangs in the water. Despite being directly beneath the most deafening industrial corridor on Earth, this specific zone is a terrifying, absolute acoustic void. The physical water does not vibrate. The engine noise is completely canceled out. Pan the camera, and the reason might be revealed. Jutting from the seabed is a towering, perfectly hexagonal column of polished black basalt. It is devoid of marine growth and mathematically perfect. Green laser bathymetry proves the impossible. Perfect 120-degree angles on a completely smooth face. Sub-bottom profilers show this alien geometry extending at least 40 meters deep into the bedrock. To further confuse models, scientific floats reveal a massive, rogue deep-water current flowing backward, aggressively fighting the incoming tide. When an autonomous yellow glider attempts to map it, the chaotic turbulence and insane pressure fluctuations physically violently crush the data, sending the analog depth needle spinning wildly. Finally, the glider approaches the edge of the limestone seabed. It simply falls away. A massive, completely unmapped, pitch-black subtrench opens up, a terrifying waterfall of toxic sediment cascading into the void. Descend into this abyss past 150 meters, and the jagged rock turns into a perfectly flat, highly polished floor of dense metallic ore. On this impossible floor, the ferromagnetic dust dances in perfect geometric fractal patterns, manipulated by an entirely unknown electromagnetic pulse from deep within the Earth. This impossible energy source sits directly beneath 21 million barrels of explosive oil. If you want to know what happens when we disturb these ancient forces, leave a comment and subscribe. As the ROV slowly ascends back toward the surface, the terrifying acoustic void shatters. The deafening roar of the supertankers violently bleeds back into the water. We crash through a harsh thermal boundary, leaving the crystal-clear anomaly behind, instantly blinded again by the toxic, heavy marine snow of the industrial reality.
Why this ocean place matters. We violently breach the oily surface alongside the returning ROV. The blinding midday sun and the deafening roar of a passing supertanker violently snap us back to the chaotic human reality. The heavy titanium sample canister, holding the impossible secrets of the deep trench, is frantically locked away by scientists in hazard suits. Yet when you look at the official digital navigation charts used by the fleet, the 88-meter seafloor is marked as completely flat and unremarkable. The profound, heavily magnetic basalt anomaly is entirely undocumented. The massive global supply chain is operating completely blind to the terrifying geological mysteries buried directly beneath it. As the blood-red sun sets, pull back to 300 meters. Armed with the knowledge of what lies below, the massive supertankers suddenly look incredibly fragile. The impenetrable ceiling of smog, cavitation bubbles, and steel hulls permanently entombs the deep-sea mystery. By night, the strait is a glowing, terrifying grid of human ignorance, completely overrunning the profound secrets of the Earth. We are forced to stare into the pitch-black water between the ships, knowing the impossible truth is perfectly hidden in plain sight. As the supertanker finally escapes the strait and enters the Gulf of Oman, the global connection is made. But the destruction follows. A massive, swirling underwater river of toxic marine snow and black microplastics is aggressively pushed out into the Arabian Sea, exporting the pollution to the broader planetary ocean. From 1,000 meters up, the fleet disperses into a massive circulatory system, feeding the insatiable, blindingly lit coastal refineries of Asia and Europe. This is why the extreme danger is tolerated. Modern civilization literally cannot function without this explosive flow. But look at what it costs. Beneath the military blockades and the naval destroyers protecting the artery, the seafloor is a graveyard. Ancient, fragile coral reefs are completely shattered and smothered in black sludge. The rising thermal heat of the engines is physically collapsing the natural halocline layers, while the toxic dead zone violently expands upward, suffocating native fish. On the coast, rising sea levels are actively smashing the concrete defense barriers, the environment violently fighting back against the industrial machinery. Hover over the center of the strait one last time. The completely unmapped anomaly remains permanently sealed away by the intersecting wakes of the massive fleet. On the dark seafloor, a perfectly preserved prehistoric fossil is slowly, relentlessly buried by falling black diesel sludge. We have traded millions of years of natural evolution and profound geological truth for the relentless mechanical violence of the global energy artery. The incredibly heavy, polluted water violently churns against the lens, completely erasing the silent abyss below.
The relentless cycle simply grinds forward into the dark.